All right, well, I'm going to get started. My name's Ian Lurie. In case you don't know who I am the CEO and founder of Portent. Portent is a company that is now located in Smith Tower in Washington, in Seattle. And that's where our secret lair is. It's not very secret. We're on the 17th floor. If you're ever here and you want to stop by, go for it. You can tweet your questions, as I said, to PortentU, or you can use the question tool in GoToMeeting. Just note that I probably won't answer questions till the very end unless I see one that comes up that seems particularly relevant. The other thing is, as always, I have a link bundle where I put everything that I mention in the webinar. This webinar is not particularly tool heavy, so there shouldn't be a lot of stuff, but you can keep this link and I'll show it again at the very end so that you can go and see all the stuff that I talk about. So for the folks online who are copywriters, I am sure that you have been here, as have I. You put together some copy and it looks absolutely beautiful and perfect, and the client looks at it and they think it's perfect, and then you ask them how they like it and they say that they absolutely love it, of course. And then you take it to print and you print 20,000 copies, or maybe even 50,000. Not that I've ever had this happen before, but I have. And then you notice there's a typo. And I've been through this, luckily, maybe one or two times, because after that I sort of learned my lesson. But when it happens, it's definitely an Alka-Seltzer moment, right? I mean, it's one of those moments that kind of defines you as a copywriter. There are good ones and bad ones. This is one of the bad ones. And for me, there are 20, and actually 21 if you include the bonus, disasters that kind of haunt me as a copywriter, because they're always there. They're always waiting to happen. And I've been through every one. So this entire presentation, except for maybe a couple, are using personal stories, things that have happened to me in the last 25 years. So it should, just so you know, I'm not poking fun at other people. I'm poking fun at myself. So just in case you've made these mistakes and you feel like, oh, Ian's just making fun of me, I'm not. They're inevitable. They hit every single one of us. What we can do, though, is avoid or mitigate them, just sometimes, so that they happen less often. And that's really our goal. So I'm offering you a chance here in the next hour to basically learn from my pain, learn all the things that have happened to me that either happened because of the print world but are still relevant, or happened online and therefore are very relevant, and things that you can't necessarily recover from once you make those mistakes. And I've come up with 3 different classifications of copywriting disasters. There are the embarrassing ones, right, which have no permanent consequences, but when it happens, you're kind of thinking, oh boy, I can't believe I just did that. There's the bad ones, which may get you fired by the client or your boss, or at least taken off a project. And then there's the Gods Preserve Us, or GPU incidents. Those are the ones where I'm going to simply deny that I know you, because they are so bad and spread around the internet for so long and sort of take on a life of their own that you may want to seek out a different career. I didn't, but I don't know. I thought about it. So without further ado, here we go. The first disaster is what I call the Great Philosophy Massacre. And that was the Great Philosophy Massacre of 1996. And it was basically a mistake that got through the net. There's no other way to put it. So if you take a look at this piece that I wrote, this is the actual headline. What's wrong? Well, I misspelled philosophy. I said philosophy. That's not right. The client looked at it. I looked at it. We proofed it. We looked at the blue lines. It still got past us, which was really embarrassing. And the classification there is bad, because you can lose the client. In this case, I ate the cost, which was not fun at all at the time, because I was running my business on credit cards at the back room of my house. So $5,000 was not trivial. On the other hand, the client appreciated that and didn't fire me. How do you avoid it? Well, in this case, you could just use a bloody spell checker. I mean, that would have taken care of the problem here. The tool I was using at the time, it was so long ago, it didn't have a built-in spell checker. I still could have used one. And there's a very basic technique that I learned long before, back when you guys were all in diapers. I'm going to sound really old while I'm talking about this. Long ago, before computers had really sophisticated editing tools in them, read it backwards. Just read the entire document backwards. If you read it backwards, then you're looking at words instead of sentences, and it's much easier to pick out errors. And of course, you can have someone else read it. And I know a lot of the time you're in a hurry, you're rushing, you don't necessarily want to take the time. Just if you have someone you know who maybe owes you a favor or two, or you just have, a person sitting around, something, anything, just ask them if they can take a quick look, because those errors are going to jump out at them in a second. Whereas you and probably your client have been looking at this for so long that even after you do look at it 3 or 4 times, you can't recover, because you send it to publishing with the error, or you publish your website with a headline front and center on the homepage with that spelling mistake. And yeah, you can correct it now, but in the meantime, 20 bazillion people are doing screen captures and posting them to Twitter. So, like all things on the internet, it feels very transient, but it is all permanent. The next disaster is the incomplete headline. This is one of my favorites. It's the best way to step on a banana peel. This was the one that I did. And there's a small problem with this one. It was a little painful, especially because I was a college student and I got in a little trouble because of it. It was in our school newspaper, which I don't know why I got in trouble. There's probably only 2 people who read it, but I still got in trouble. And it was about bee fertility. And it might have made more sense to write something like teacher, student, research bee fertility, as opposed to teacher and student and fertility experiment. I just think somehow that might not have gotten me in as much trouble. And yeah, that's embarrassing. It was really embarrassing. I took a lot of ribbing for the next, 3 years at college. Someone's asking me, why is audio muted? So are folks unable to hear me all of a sudden? You should be able to hear me. Yeah, I'm not sure. If you're not getting audio, I'm not sure what the issue is. Sorry. But like I always say, when something goes wrong, and you get lemons, laugh at someone else. Always makes life feel better, right? If you can just see someone else's mistakes. I'm not serious here, okay? It's kind of mean, but there are some real humdingers out there. This is my favorite. And I always say, I'm a pretty open-minded guy, and if they want to go for it, that's fine. But it probably isn't what they meant. And the way you check is using this thing called the blank sheet of paper test, which would have saved me from my mistake as well. And what the test says is, if you give that headline to someone on the street on a blank sheet of paper, will they know what you're talking about and reach the correct conclusion about the subject about which you're talking? If they don't, like this, that's a problem. All right, and in this case, you could argue, okay, yeah, if you show this to someone on the street, they're going to understand because it's the Supreme Court and they're trying something, et cetera, but still, almost anyone's going to look at this and snicker. And if they're looking at this and snickering and you can add one word and fix it, you might want to think about that. There are times to do this intentionally, and I'm not saying this wasn't, but this would be a very strange time to do it. The other thing is that online, it's very rare that a short, opaque headline works better than a longer, very clear one. We've done a lot of testing of this, and the longer, fully descriptive headline, the headline that passes the blank sheet of paper test, outperforms the ones that don't pass that test by 20-30% in almost every case, and they outperform as far as click-through and search. They outperform as far as retention on the page, and they outperform as far as return visits and sharing. So you definitely want to try to use that fully descriptive headline that passes that blank sheet of paper test. Disaster 3 is search term avoidance. And I won't talk much about search engines here because I don't necessarily think writing for keywords is that relevant at this point. But you can just hurt yourself, okay? We've worked for a few companies that design and manufacture bridesmaid dresses. And I'll end up putting in things, we'll end up putting in things like wedding garment or destination formal wear or destination dress. And you look at all this and you think, well, you look back on this and you think, why did I do this? What was the reasoning? Why did I have to do that? And the failure is I didn't use my audience's lexicon. That's the problem. And if you don't use the audience's lexicon, you start using language that they don't understand, where they don't necessarily know exactly what it is that you're saying. And if they don't, it's not so much that, there's a major ranking problem here as that they're going to go to someone else who they do understand. You may have the best dress around. You may only be, a millimeter from the perfect description. But if you're a millimeter from it and someone else hits it on the head, who are they going to go look at? They're going to go look at the other person. And that's what you have to look out for. That's where you get into trouble. Sorry, I'm having some kind of mouse control issue. I don't know. Seriously, it's not a mouse control issue. It's my issue. But so how do you avoid it? Well, first thing is have a brain. Okay, I'm sorry, and I know this sounds mean, but just think. If this is a topic that people have talked about for years and years, and they've always called them bridesmaid dresses, and everyone out there uses the phrase bridesmaid dresses, or everyone out there calls them running shoes, they don't call them athletic footwear, just use the term. All right, you have to use it, otherwise people don't find you. And if you think maybe that you have a whole different definition, that your product is different, so therefore it should use a different phrase, great. But get them there using the phrase everyone's familiar with, then educate them. Otherwise, you're holding this kind of existential standard that nobody else cares about, and you're costing yourself business. You can also use tools like WordStream. They have a free tool, but you probably also want to sign up because you can just see what people search for. So here I put in wedding dresses, and let's say I was going to do something like wedding formal wear. You can see that wedding formal wear shows up nowhere, right? There is no use of it here. It doesn't show up. So you can look at these phrases and say, all right, these are the ones I want to go for, but the other ones, the peripheral stuff just doesn't come into the picture. You can also use SEMrush, same thing, right? You can find out exactly, does wedding garment actually show up? Well, yeah, but if you compare it to wedding dress and dresses, wedding garment has 90 searches per month. Wedding dresses has 673,000. Which one are you going to go for? I mean, I hope it's obvious. And also, you can just use a survey. I mean, you can go out and use Google Consumer Surveys, or you can use SurveyMonkey, anything like that, and just ask people, which one of these makes more sense, and just have them click. It's that easy. And almost always, if you use a big enough sample, it's going to be very, very clear which one you want to use. Just do anything but guessing. Okay? If you're not familiar with the industry, don't just start writing and using the terms that one person has given you unless you're very, very sure that those are the terms they should use. And if you hear things from them like, that's not the correct terminology, or we've redefined the space, or we've redefined the product, you need to go and take a look and verify that you are indeed using the terms that everybody else uses. Disaster 4 is baffle them with bullshit, right? And this one happens a lot, especially when you're writing about a topic you don't understand. I wrote this one. I'm totally ashamed of it. I am not going to read it aloud because it gives me a headache and it's embarrassing, but I dare you to figure out what this is actually talking about, because frankly, I'm not sure either. This was 10 or 11 years ago. What happens? Well, it drives customers away, right? Because they take one look at it. If they're looking for a solution to a problem, which is usually why someone comes to your page, they look at this and they say, I don't know if this is a solution to my problem. I don't even know what this is. And you have to capture them in that first second or two when they get there. This does not capture me in the first second or two unless maybe I'm looking for a real challenge, which I'm probably not if I'm looking for an answer to my questions. How do you avoid it? Well, first of all, understand knowing a word doesn't mean you have to use it. So extant, really cool. There's a TV show coming out of using that phrase. Awesome. It makes me feel really special to use it. Also, completely useless, right? I mean, extant, how many people know what that means? And even if you do, again, it takes that effort. And if someone else has written something that's easier to read, who is your customer going to go to? Also, again, apply the blank sheet of paper test, right? If you showed this phrase to someone on the street who had no idea about your product or anything else, are they going to be able to get the slightest information? No, they're not. That's a really, really good indicator right there. right? Even if I give them a dictionary, it's not going to work. This is a little bit of an improvement. At least when people read this, it's going to make sense, which is nice. And we have a couple questions coming up here, and I'm going to take a shot at answering them now because it looks to me like some of these are pretty relevant. Google Trends can be helpful. Yes, you definitely want to try out Google Trends. I like to use these other tools because Google, I'm not as trusting of Google data as I used to be. A lot of the data they provide seems to have major accuracy or precision problems. But if you have a situation where you are trying to use a new term, definitely take a look. See if there's a strong trend. Another question from Diane. What if your bosses are enamored of super short, cutesy headlines, even for e-commerce and direct response? How can I convince them that these elliptical 2-word headlines do not work? Well, and I love that saying, by the way, in the Naked brand, clear is the new clever. I do think that's a really, really good one to have. Given what you're describing and your relationship with your bosses, I would say ask them if you can test. Just ask them, can I put 2 pages out there and test the 2 headlines? Or just ask them if you can take maybe the next 3 things, next 3 pieces of content, next 3 products, whatever, live, just using the longer headline. Or go looking around for data. I think we have a post on our site that talks about it, and there's all sorts of other studies out there showing this. It's not, we didn't just pull this out of our butts. This is something, well, that's a very unprofessional phrase. Anyway, this is something that, a lot of people have done careful research on. Because, I used to like writing clever, cool headlines too. It's not like I came out of nowhere saying, write long headlines. I used to write for print. And I liked writing really, really cool short headlines because those headlines were shown in context, right? You would always see that headline on a printed page. You already had the full piece of content in your hands. You would see the other text, the headlines, the images, all of it right there. Here, first of all, the headline can be taken out of context. Second of all, you're on a scrolling screen, so people may not see all the information right when they land there. And third, the attention span is microscopic compared to traditional media like print. So you have to be very, very careful. And again, those full-length headlines, the fully descriptive headlines that pass that blank sheet of paper test are going to be better. Same thing with short descriptions and things like that. This is just not helpful. Okay, it's just not going to help people out that much unless you're trying to show off your how many syllables you can cram into a sentence. So disaster 5 is the poo sandwich. And the poo sandwich is, I'm using the polite descriptor, but the poop sandwich is when you write something that at the beginning and the end has all sorts of cool information, but in the middle, there's just stuff so bad that makes you want to hurl. And this does not happen very often. This is a blog post I wrote a long time ago about what advertising should do. It had a great start, a great finish. The stuff in the middle was pretty much fluff. And I'm my own biggest critic, but I mean, really, if I even looked at the scrolls and how people read this, they read the top little bit and then they left, or they read the top little bit, zipped right through the middle and read the end. Whatever it was, this post did not work. And in part it did not work because, and I knew very well, I was filling this with fluff. It was a poop sandwich. And this one's just embarrassing, right? I mean, it's not something I'm going to put in my portfolio. It doesn't function very well, so it's not going to do the job. If you're writing some longer form content that's going to take care of or describe how a particular product works or comparing several products, this can really become problematic. Unfortunately, I got no really great alternative for this, except don't rush. All right, this happened to me because I was rushing to publish. I had to get this article live, or at least I felt like I did. And often as writers, we feel like publishing something is imperative. We're under a deadline, or we're being ordered to do something sooner, or we just feel like, oh yeah, I want to get this published today before I go home. Just try not to rush wherever possible. If you do have to take it live, and you do feel like that middle part is fluffy, can you just take it out? Right? Can you just have the beginning and the end? Or can you take that middle part and just turn it into one paragraph instead of 5? Those are some easy solutions, but the best one is just wait a little bit, take some time to look at it. Disaster 6 is writer's block. I don't lack for things to say, as people probably know. This isn't often a problem for me, but when it does hit, it's definitely a GPU. It's definitely a God's preserve us, because I'm completely hosed. I can't come up with anything to write once I've got a good case of writer's block going. Some ways to mitigate it are free writing. So writing about you're just writing randomly. Don't write about the particular topic. Just start writing on a sheet of paper and see where it takes you. Go to Google and search on the topic. Right? Just take a look. Or if you're writing about something general like marketing, search headlines. Take a look at what people are writing about. Don't copy. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But you can definitely get some ideas. And then there's also a tool out there called enigma.io. And it's one of many tools that lets you search through open data, public data sources. I'm not saying everything should be data-driven, but sometimes you can find some really interesting data sources that you can do really fun, creative stuff with, or sometimes it'll just flip a switch in your brain and you'll have some ideas for things to write. So any tool like that, any place where information is being collected, and it doesn't have to be relevant to your topic, is a good place to go to get some ideas. I have gone to museums, and that has worked for me, seriously. Stepping away from the desk in almost any form can help me. So just going out for a walk, going to a museum, going out for lunch, watching a TV show, reading a book, any of those things can really, really help me. Disaster number 7 is stealing an idea intentionally. And, this, how do I describe this? It's not the worst thing in the world. It happens a lot. I did it here, in fact, and it wasn't totally intentional. It was actually kind of by accident, but I did it. And what you want to do, and yeah, I was desperate, you just want to own it, right? So here I am on a webinar now saying, yeah, you know what? I totally stole this idea, and it's a blatant theft, and I did it because it's a really good idea, a really good description, and I couldn't come up with a better one. And here's the person who I found who used it. Just note here that this particular expression actually goes back much further than that, but just acknowledging that it's not my original idea. And in my opinion, it's inevitable and it's probably okay if you own it. Don't try to pass off some really great phrase that you're using as something new if you know it's not. The reason for that is not just that it's going to make you look kind of low class, but also because it affects the other writer. You come up with these expressions and someone else takes them and they start getting lifted all over the internet, and it's a really strong disincentive to ever write anything useful. So disaster 8, and by the way, that's the Blue Angels flying over my head, so I'll wait a second. And once again, I can't see them. It's not fair. So disaster 8 is out and out plagiarism. And for people who don't know, this is a photocopier. It's what we used to use to copy sheets of paper when we needed to, as opposed to a scanner. Now, the last time I committed out and out plagiarism was in 4th grade. And I didn't even really understand it, but I was writing a history report, and I just took a chapter from my history book and just copied it down. Now, obviously, if I knew what I was doing, I probably wouldn't have taken the book that the teacher uses and copied those passages, but that's what I did. I was never a very good criminal. And yes, I got into trouble, and I had to go back and rewrite my report like 11 times or something like that. But there's people who do it as grown-ups. Now, I wrote a book a couple of years ago, and it sold 5 or 6 copies. I don't know. It was a bestseller on the Ian Lurie bestseller list, and did a blog post about it on the Portent website. And lo and behold, someone else apparently wrote the exact same thing at the exact same time. It's a miracle. How did that happen? It's like they're reading my mind, and their name is Ian Lurie, just like me. That's amazing. This one is definitely a GPU. All right. Go to jail. This is the worst possible thing that you can do to a writer or any creator of content. And I don't want to hear information wants to be free, and I don't want to hear, copying or imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. I don't want to hear that you deserve to have this content free because you're already getting it for free, right? Or in the case of a movie or something like that, there's a whole bunch of people who make a living off that content. This is stealing. It is theft outright. And if you see out there, people are getting into trouble all the time for stealing this stuff. And just because you're not doing an academic paper doesn't mean that you don't suck, all right? Because if you're stealing content this way, you kind of do. And in this case, by the way, the guy who did the plagiarism, he used a scraper. And so the scraper automatically grabbed the content. That does not make it okay. All right, if you're using a scraper, you should know and understand this. Of course, this is going to lift articles 100% from another source. So again, it's a bad thing, and I could rant for hours on this. It is not the sincerest form of flattery. If you want to avoid it, get permission, right? I've gotten polite emails saying, hey, can I reprint this? And I'll say either, can you just do a summary and link back to me, or sure, just link back to me. Or, add value to it. Take the article and do a critique. So you take like a few sentences here and there and you say, here's what Ian says, I kind of differ and here's why. Or do a summary, or expand on it. Do something to add value to it, and don't copy it. All right, don't copy 90% of an article or 70% of an article. Don't copy anything. Someone just asked, what is a scraper? It's a good question. It's a piece of automated software that takes articles or content that's published on one website and copies it somewhere else. So the truth is that Google is kind of a scraper. It goes and it crawls websites, copies them, and places them in its index. The more common use of the phrase scraper is these automated tools that go to websites, steal their content, and republish them. That's, in the context of plagiarism, that's what a scraper is. Other kinds of scrapers do slightly different things. They'll copy prices or specific data from another site. Not all scrapers are bad, but all scrapers that commit plagiarism are clearly bad. But again, I want to emphasize, a scraper is a tool. It's a piece of software. People use it for lots of different reasons, including Google. If you use it and you know it's going to commit plagiarism, and if you're using it, there's no way you can tell me that you're using a scraper and you don't understand what it's doing. Then you are committing plagiarism, not the scraper. And if you come back to me and you say, oh, I was using this tool and I didn't understand, I don't care. All right, that's like pointing a shotgun and firing it and then telling me you didn't understand that it was going to hurt someone. That is ridiculous. Not that I have any opinions, but now there is secondhand plagiarism, and this is slightly different. And as far as I know, this has never happened to me, but I have hired copywriters, so sure, it could have happened. So here's an example. This is on our homepage. It says, we've been getting clients future-proof internet marketing results, and we say how long. Miraculously, a few weeks later, these other guys show up, and the saying on their homepage is, for 10 years, blah, blah, has been getting clients future-proof internet marketing results. Wow, it's amazing. They're brilliant. It's almost like they went to my site and stole it, which they did. Now, what probably happened here, I doubt the owners, that the business owner did this. My guess is they hired a copywriter who went and did it. And if I go through their site, I am sure I will find other sentences and things copied from my site. They'll be a little bit more careful. So instead of committing plagiarism by just lifting all the content, they're going to take little bits and pieces of it and use it so that their client or their boss doesn't see what they're doing. Again, they may think it's okay. It's not okay. And generally, most of the time when a site has been stolen from me, or a copy has been stolen, or the whole thing, including images, has been stolen, folks have told me that their copywriter or someone they handled did it. That's fine, but it can get you into big trouble anyway. For example, I might call you out in a webinar and record it and place it on SlideShare for all time. Now, in this case, I was generous and didn't show their name. I'll come back to that in a minute. But it's very easy to avoid. All right, if you hire a copywriter who's writing content for you, the first few times you work with them, take the primary sayings, the primary headlines on your site, take a couple of sentences from paragraphs or image captions, and just see exactly what, and put it in quotes, search for it on Google, and see if you find other results with the same thing. By putting it in quotes, you are forcing Google to find that phrase, that exact phrase, and that's what you want to see. If you get tons and tons of duplication, well, that's when you know something is wrong. They may be copying the content. The way to approach that, with someone, the way to approach that is, go to that particular website, to that owner, and just say, hey, it looks to me like you may have copied this. Can you take a look? And as far as the person you're employing, same thing. I would go to them and say, hey, this is showing up in the search engines. Can you explain it to me? If they say anything like, I don't know, sure, this is okay, I just wanted to take it and use this one little bit or something like that, I would really question their integrity. I would just question, you're hiring someone to come up with original content and they're not doing it. Next question is, what if you use the general style of the sentence and change the content? Again, in most cases, you're supposed to cite or reference the place you got that content. In my experience, I haven't seen anyone do that and rewrite content in a way that isn't pretty blatant. If you want to try it, you can. It's very hard to detect. I just question the value of doing it, and I question the effect that's going to have long term on your career, because you're still stealing an idea. Now, certainly, just to clarify, I have gone to sites and read really great reports or seen great videos or something, and gotten general philosophies that they were teaching me, and then used what they taught me. That's fine, right? Because they're teaching you something. But that's different from looking at an article and saying, "Oh, this is good," and then rewriting it and putting it on your own website. I'm just not a fan. Next question is using structure as a platform. Is it okay to use structure as a platform? I think we're getting to hair splitting here, to be honest. And I think if you have to ask me, it's probably not okay. It's just, this is a very black and white question. There are not shades of gray. If you feel you are appropriating someone else's idea and using it for your website, and you don't have permission, and you're not going to cite them, and you're not going to use, you're not going to somehow give credit or let them benefit, you're probably stealing the content. And I'm sorry to say it that way, but that's almost always the case. So disaster 10 is the miracle of telepathy. I came up with this idea last week, or longer ago actually, but I was talking about it last week, called ROTI, Return on Time Invested. And I thought, that was awesome. This is a new term. I finally have an acronym that I came up with. People say, oh yeah, Ian, 50 years ago came up with ROTI. Yeah, no, not so much. When I did a search on Google, there are 17,000 previous mentions of return on time invested. What happened there? Well, it's embarrassing. I'm kind of a loser for having done that. In this case, when you see that this many other people are using it, and you note that there's no clear one person, it's probably okay to just say it. The other thing to look for is, how is it being used, and how are you using it? So again, if you're taking this term and you're converting it to use for copy where other people were using it for something else, and you're writing your own original stuff, that's probably okay. It's like talking about SEO, right? SEO is a phrase that someone came up with a long time ago, and in spite of one person's efforts to copyright it, it is out there in the public. If you're using it and you discover that someone else coined it and they own it and no one else uses it, then again, you want to go back and cite them. Just say, hey, this is such a great, this is the phrase, I don't know, John Doe's phrase, return on time invested, is a perfect description here. Or return on time invested in parentheses, I'm stealing this from John Doe, whatever. That makes sure that they get credit. Disaster 11, the bad comma. This is a classic. Lots of people like to laugh at it. This is something I wrote for an airline years and years ago. Best in class restroom, flight attendant, and food service. They don't have restroom flight attendants. What I meant was they have a best in class restroom, great flight attendants, and food service. That reads a lot better. And classification is bad. As long as it doesn't get published, it's bad. If it does get published, it's moving on to GPU because people are going to be really, really irritated. Read it before you send it. It's not that hard. Or again, go for the blank sheet of paper test. If you showed this to someone, what would they say? Right? If you take out this comma, Go ahead and show it to someone without the comma. Do they burst out laughing? Okay, there's probably a problem. Disaster 12, autocorrection. Everybody knows the legends around this. The night that Osama bin Laden was killed, I wrote this tweet, and this is not what I meant. This is the kind. It's definitely bad, and it can trash entire stock markets if you have enough people following you on Twitter. Fortunately, I did not. I deleted the tweet and quickly replaced it with this one because, frankly, it was so embarrassing that I couldn't stand having it out there. Just read before you send. Autocorrect can really be a harsh mistress. You really, really have to be careful with autocorrection. The unsafe structure. This is something that a lot of writers and other folks really miss when they're writing and proofing. So readers do not enjoy a challenge. All right, this is not going to get read. It's classification bad, and it's just stupid, and I shouldn't get paid, because even if this was the best prose ever written, it's so intimidating online on a screen. Who's going to read it? Probably no one. So a few basic rules to avoid it. One, don't ever have a paragraph longer than 6 lines. All right, here I go a little bit longer, but just as a rule of thumb, break it up at that point. Try to never have more than 3 paragraphs without some form of break, a subheading, an image, something else. And then also, use useful images, right? Put them in where they enhance the content. Don't just stick in random images, but if this was a page talking about couches, sure, why not? And then the last one, the last really specific one, is try to use only 10 to 15 words per line. Now, as the writer, you don't always have control over this, right? Because someone else has created the style sheet. But if you can, try to use 10 to 15 words per line. There's been a lot of testing on this, and it seems to show that that's a good average. And then finally, do learn a little typography. As a copywriter, you don't have to know a ton, but if you can just use a tool like this golden ratio typography calculator, this will tell you at a given font size or a given width, what type size you should use, what the line height should be, all kinds of really, really useful stuff. So you'll want to definitely go and learn to use a tool like this, just so you have the basic rules in mind. Number 14, and I'm going to have to apologize in advance. There's some pretty offensive content here. It's not mine, but this is a spa in my neighborhood in West Seattle, and they have a sign out front that's just as bad as this. And you can just look at the picture on the right and the text that's in there. That's not okay unless you know that your market will appreciate it and see the humor. For example, these guys have a branch up in Fremont, and Fremont's a much more kind of funky neighborhood, and probably it works just fine up there. In West Seattle, where there's one church every 3 or 4 blocks, not that I mind, but there is, and you have a pretty conservative audience of people, small families with children. This is not going to go over very well when there's a sign on the sidewalk that says this, or when you're booking your appointment and you're on the web. So you have to be very, very conscious of your audience. Think about the result you want. If you want to shock people, then it's fine. And I think that the Wax On Spa probably wanted to get the response that they got. But you need to be aware of your cultural context. This was a classic one. For people who don't know, on Passover, Jews are not allowed to eat bread. So offering fresh baked bread for Passover definitely means you do not understand the culture to which you are selling. It's just bad for business. So try to keep it, try to be as precise as possible. Try to focus on the right places. Try to make sure that you understand what is or is not going to offend, and what's going to just sort of tweak a little bit versus cause great offense. And then the final one is don't be an asshole. All right, this is just mean. This is from Mentos. This is just mean and culturally, and not so much culturally, but just offensive. This does not need to be out there. On the opposite end is going completely passive. So as an example, if I'm getting paid by the word, this is great, right? With our tires, customers will ride with fewer flat tires. First of all, that's awful because I put it tires in there twice. But it's like I'm talking to you, but I'm looking in the other direction, right? So I'm standing in front of you, but my head is turned to the side, and I'm having a conversation with you. It's easy to avoid, right? Just use active voice and talk to the reader. So our bicycle tires help you ride with fewer flats. The you means I'm looking straight at you, not off to the side. And notice there's no will, there's no is, there's no are. It's just saying this is what's going to happen for you. Also avoid plague words like indeed and regardless and things like that. Often these are words you just don't even need. Sometimes they're words that, they're phrases that are 3 or 4 words that could do just fine as 1 or 2. I have an entire list of them in the link bundle, so you can go take a look. And by the way, I use them all the time. Indeed is one of my great copywriting sins. I use it all the time. Also, undoubtedly. Writing angry or drunk, never a good thing. I wrote this piece basically just making fun of a book by Chris Anderson, who is an author for, I think, Wired, called Free, The Future of a Radical Price. And I didn't agree. And I still don't agree, and I have some fairly rational reasons for disagreement. But this, I just went in and just blasted him. Utopian tirade was one of the nicer things that I said. And this is definitely GPU. This guy's never going to talk to me again, and I probably have to avoid him if I ever see him at a party because he might hit me with something. But also, it just makes you look kind of bad. And actually, someone just posted a really good saying, which is write drunk, edit sober. And yeah, I'm not sure who wrote that either, but it's a really good rule because then you can avoid this kind of disaster. The other thing would be write angry, edit when you're not, or something like that. The best way to avoid it is to just walk away for a minute. Just take a breath. And I've found as I've gotten older that it's much easier for me to do that. But if you can just put a sticky note on your monitor that says walk away for a minute or take 10, it will help you many, many times. And it also leads to another disaster if you write angry. If I write something in a particular blog post where I'm pointing the finger at someone and saying that they're a hypocrite, which, by the way, is just as bad as calling them a plagiarist, in my opinion, I'm ignorant. I didn't look at all the information because it turns out he was offering his book for free online. So I wrote this nasty thing saying, why don't you give your book away for free, you loser? And he wrote back to me, well, I am giving the book away for free, you jerk. And as I kind of started to realize, ignorance at 500 decibels is still ignorance. How do you fix it? Well, just own it right away and apologize. I immediately posted something on there with a link and everything else. It doesn't make up for it, but at least now I feel like, I own the fact that I screwed up and this was unfair. And at worst, that at least means when someone looks back on this years from now, they understand that I didn't just, go out and keep bullying. At best, it means that Chris Anderson actually is looking and saying, all right, you know what? Ian screwed up, but he admitted it, so that's okay. The other thing is, don't just delete it. Okay, if you just delete the nasty thing you said, you remember all those scrapers I talked about? They've already copied the article. It's already showing up everywhere. And also, if you're really visible, if you're in the public eye, then what you said is already out there, right? If you spread disinformation or talk about something where you don't have the facts, then you need to correct yourself publicly if you made that mistake. And as a copywriter, if you're working for a major brand, you need to do the same thing. If you don't, you're doing a real harm to people, and you're not correcting the mistake. Disaster 18 is treating your customer as an algorithm. I refuse to read this. It is too embarrassing. This is an actual product description I wrote. Okay, it was a long time ago, back when search engines really did care. And yes, it's really painful. It doesn't work anymore. All right, even if you think you want to do it, even if you think putting the keyword in there twice, or and I know people are going to start asking me now, well, how many times is okay? Just write it to read really well, because Google totally understands, the bots totally understand when you're keyword stuffing. All right, just write it rationally. All right, use your audience's lexicon, like I said before. Write really well. Don't be passive. All those things. Put all those things together and you can do much better than if you intentionally try to stuff keywords into something. Disaster 19 is going all mealy-mouthed. That's not usually a problem for me, but it can happen, and this is something I wrote ages ago. I think that, and this is just my opinion, tablets are just a fad. And being politically equitable here, it's like I'm being Michael Dukakis and Donald Rumsfeld all at once. Just commit. It's not about knowing the things that we don't know that we know that we don't know. What the hell? What am I saying here? David Ogilvy said, swing for the fences. Don't write wishy-washy content, because if you do, you're never going to get the home run, and eventually you do want to. If you write something and it doesn't make you smile, then do it again. Or if it doesn't make you grimace, do it again. I said this, okay, out in public, and yeah, it was a really bad prediction, to say the least. But, I just came out and said it. I wasn't being all, I wasn't trying to cover my bases or anything else. And what you'll find is if you're wrong, people still respect you for it. Because, yeah, you're wrong, but you went out there and you stated your view. Obviously, if you're being insulting or nasty, that's a different matter. But, make your statement. Make it clearly. Don't force people to figure out what you're saying or what you stand for. Disaster 20 is creating the checklist. And I did this for years. I tried to give my team a checklist of exactly what you should say, how you should write. Use the key phrase this many times. I didn't actually say 10 times. Make it look just like this. And what happens then is you do it once for one thing, and then everyone starts coming to you and saying, okay, well, this wasn't on the checklist. Can you please add it? And they'll start doing that for everything, so that all creativity disappears, right? And even when you get to the point where you're adding, be creative to your actual checklist, they can't do it. So instead, mitigate. Point at the things that you can manage, the repeatable stuff that is part of the process of writing really, really good content. So, write down how to do the proofread. Write down who should see a piece of content. Whose hands should it pass through. Write down basic techniques for ensuring that you cite all the things you should cite. But don't write down how to write. Don't write down what the style should be unless you have very strict branding guidelines. And even then, it's not a checklist. It's just something saying the kind of personality you should project. So checklists, generally bad. The last disaster, and this is the bonus, and it again comes from difficult personal experience, going for perfect, waiting for the idea or the first sentence that just means the heavens will open and you'll hear trumpets and it'll be great. Everything I've never written is sitting in my brain waiting for the perfect topic or the perfect story or the perfect idea. I have at least 3 books in my head I would love to write someday, and the only excuse is that I just haven't fleshed them all out all that well. And really, there's no excuse for that. I have entire blog posts in there as well. And, my last point, I guess, is, excuse me, just get out there and write. Just start writing. And you don't have to show all of it to everyone. But the more you write, the easier it gets to avoid the kind of mistakes that I described in this particular presentation. And that's it. So I'll take questions now. Looks like we have a quick question. How do you feel that would work in a style guide? So things for, I talked about that a little bit, but to me a style guide usually is around brand. There's certain terms you are not allowed to use, for example. There are certain ways to talk about a product. There's certain ways to name things, what should be capitalized and what shouldn't. And then, that's the style guide. And then you have the process. You have the process information, and that's a whole different, a whole different thing. And it's something generally the copy team's going to come up with on their own. And it's going to be, here's what we need to do before we roll something out. So any other questions? I'll give everybody a minute here. Also checking Twitter really quick. Wow, no questions. All right. Well, I will Whoops. Oh, here comes a bunch. Will slides be available? Yes. The slides are available. They're available in the link bundle that I put here that you can see right now, actually. They're also up on SlideShare right now, and I'll be doing a blog post that just links to them as well. It should be pretty easy to find. And if you can't, just tweet me. How do you feel the headline topic applies to product page titles? Now, I'm assuming you mean title tags. When it comes to title tags, the headline on the page and the title tag should be pretty closely related. They don't have to be duplicates. They certainly can be. So if you have a product page that says, I don't know, skinny jeans, all right, that's the product, but skinny jeans are part of a particular line, then in the title, the headline might be skinny jeans, but in the title, maybe it's skinny jeans dash line name dash brand name. So the headline is generally going to be at least part of the title tags. Sorry, the headline is going to be at least part of the title tag. You definitely want to do something like that just for consistency's sake. How do you pace yourself for longer articles? I get stuck editing at the beginning. Yeah, you know what, Deborah, I do the same thing. It's not always the easiest thing to figure out. What I have started trying to do is write in sections and then edit and then write another section. That's still not great, I know, but it's very hard to resist. And at some point, I just got to go with it. Do I have any webinars, events, or material focused on e-commerce that I can check out? A lot of e-commerce stuff out there that we've done. I'm assuming you mean, writing product copy. Let me think about that. I just did a webinar for Unbounce that talks about writing landing page copy. That's really, really relevant to product pages as well. So you want to take a look at those. Also, blank sheet of paper test is really, really important for product copywriting. You definitely want to take a look at that, and then using customer lexicon. If you follow those two rules, you'll be in reasonably good shape when you start writing product copy. As a small business owner, what one or two things would you recommend I do content-wise? And actually, there's a whole bunch of questions in here that are just about lack of resources or not liking to write or whatever else. If you have limited resources, either you can't afford to pay a writer, or you can't, you don't have the time yourself, or both, then you're in kind of a spot. I mean, at some point you're going to have to write or get someone else to write for you, and there's no way around that really. The only things I can think of are, I'll set limited goals for myself, like every day write 100 words just about my own products. And sometimes those 100 words will be something I can use, sometimes they won't. Sometimes I can string them together and they become something really useful. I would say that before you do anything else, before you try blogging or anything, make sure that the product or service description copy on your site is absolutely flawless. It needs to be great. And a site with lousy product descriptions or lousy service descriptions that then has a fantastic blog will get lots of visitors, but it's not going to help your business, right? It's not going to go to your core business goals. So, that would be, as far as limited resources, that's what I would say. And also, the 1 to 2 things, I would start with that. Start with the content you already have and improving it. Then go back and start writing new stuff. And when it comes to writing new stuff, you have limited resources. Well, there's a couple of options. I mean, you can take a look at local colleges and writing programs where folks will work for a lot less to build their portfolio. Besides that, I would say wait and save up, because you don't want crappy writing. And if something seems too good to be true, like going on Fiverr and paying $5 for a post or a product description, it is. You're going to get terrible copy. And the one thing that's worse than no copy and no content is really bad content. So, go for quality. Don't worry about writing tons of stuff. Write a little bit of stuff and make it really, really good. And I'm sorry that that's not the best advice, but hopefully it helps a little bit. What tools have I found to help motivate me as a writer? I love writing, so I'm probably the wrong person to ask. If you really hate writing, then as a business owner, I would say, speaking as a business owner, delegate. All right, take on the other things, and see if you can find someone else to do the writing for you. And if they don't know enough about your product or service, then get them to sit down with you for 30 minutes or an hour and brainstorm some topics and do a brain dump, and then they can turn that into good writing. If they're a good copywriter, they can definitely do that. What length should I strive for in writing online content? Unfortunately, again, I don't have a great answer. I have written things that are 250 words. Actually, I wrote a one-word blog post once. I've also written 12,000 word posts. So, I would say use precisely as many words as you need. There's no maximum or minimum length from Google's standpoint. There's no maximum or minimum length from a reader's standpoint. It depends entirely on the topic. Just remember, if you write something really long, follow those rules around readability. Make sure that you have breaks in appropriate places. You don't have more than X number of paragraphs together. You don't have more than 10 to 15 words on a line. What's the best source for royalty-free images? Well, full disclosure, a friend of mine is the head of technology at this company, but iStock Photo I really like. They charge for their images, but the images you're seeing in this presentation for the most part come from there. Other sources for free stuff, take a look at the Wikimedia Commons. You can get images there that are royalty free. You just have to check and ensure that you use whatever citation method they're asking for. So some of the images are, you can reuse it, but you must provide attribution. Some are, you can reuse it, but you can't change it, and you must provide attribution. Or some are, you can use it for non-profit purposes and provide attribution. So take a look on Wikimedia Commons. Where can I find the text on landing pages you just mentioned? I'm not quite sure what you mean there. If you're talking about the landing page webinar, go to unbounce.com. and you should be able to find it there, or just go to Google and search for Ian Lurie Unbounce, and it's probably there. I'll also put a link to it in the link bundle. Let's see. You mentioned that you. Oh yeah, sorry. Yes, Michael. It's not. I wrote a blog post and then did a webinar. The blog post has 8 tips, and then the webinar I think has 10. And again, I will put the links to those right into the link bundle. Any other questions from folks? Just about out of time. We got a couple of minutes. If you have other questions, do please tweet them to me. I really do try to answer. You can also send them to me on Google+. On Google+, I think I'm just Ian Lurie. I'll put a link to that in the link bundle as well. Just if you have longer questions, that's sometimes a good place to go. That's it, and thank you very much for attending at the end of July. I know a lot of folks are off doing stuff or want to be off doing stuff, so thank you very much. I don't know that we've settled on our next webinar, so I can't tell you for certain what it's going to be, but you will receive a notification via email in the next couple of days that tells you what the next webinar will be. All right. Thanks, everybody.